My name is Nathan Brooks. I am 63 years old, retired after nearly 4 decades as a construction supervisor, and I live in a quiet suburb outside Boise, Idaho. The houses here sit far enough apart for privacy, but close enough that everyone notices when an unfamiliar car turns into a driveway. Most mornings I still wake before sunrise. Retirement never managed to change the rhythm hammered into me by years of alarms, unfinished buildings, concrete deliveries, and men waiting for instructions. I make coffee in the same scratched metal pot I carried to construction sites for 20 years. Then I sit on the back porch and watch the darkness loosen its grip on the neighborhood. Silence never frightened me. After spending most of my life solving problems before they became disasters, I learned to appreciate a world that asked nothing from me. My wife died when Logan was 8. One evening, I was a husband and father who believed his life had a shape. A week later, I was standing in a kitchen full of condolence casseroles, trying to explain to a little boy why his mother would never walk through the door again. People told me to be strong. They never explained what strength looked like at 2 in the morning when Logan woke from a nightmare, calling for someone who was gone. They never explained how to pack a school lunch while grief sat like a stone behind my ribs. They never explained how a man was supposed to mourn while making sure the electricity stayed on and the mortgage got paid. So I invented strength as I went. I woke up. I went to work. I came home. I cooked food that was sometimes burned and sometimes barely edible. I learned which detergent did not shrink his clothes. I sat through parent-teacher conferences in work boots covered with dried mud. I watched school plays from the back row because I arrived late from the job site. I learned to braid nothing, so almost nothing, and fix everything. I was not gentle by nature. Construction had taught me to measure twice, speak once, and never trust a surface just because it looked solid. But I tried to become softer for Logan. I listened when he talked about things I did not understand. I stood beside him when he failed. I made sure he never mistook discipline for rejection. There were years when money was so tight that I knew the exact balance of my account before checking it. I skipped new work boots so Logan could play baseball. I drove a truck with a broken heater through 2 Idaho winters because he needed braces. I worked Saturdays, then Sundays, then pretended I was not tired when he asked me to throw a ball in the yard. I never told him what things cost me. Children should not grow up carrying the weight of their parents' sacrifices. At least that was what I believed then. When Logan graduated from high school, he walked across the stage in a blue gown that hung crooked over one shoulder. I stood in the crowded gymnasium and applauded until my palms hurt. Nobody beside me knew how many nights I had sat awake wondering whether I was failing him. Nobody knew how often I had feared that one tired, grieving man could never be enough. When he got accepted into college, I framed the letter. When he graduated, I framed the photograph. When he told me he had met a woman named Kelsey, I cleaned the house twice before she visited. She arrived wearing a cream-colored coat and the expression of someone inspecting a property she might purchase. She was polite. She laughed at the correct moments. She praised the roast I had cooked and asked thoughtful questions about my work. I wanted to like her. More than that, I wanted Logan to be happy. Kelsey came from money. Her father owned several businesses, invested in commercial property, and spent winters somewhere warm. She mentioned him often, at first casually, then constantly. My father never buys used vehicles. My father says renting is throwing money away. My father had 3 investment accounts before he turned 30. My father would have hired a professional. Her father became an invisible guest at every gathering. A man who never entered my house yet somehow sat at the head of my table. Mine had owned a toolbox. I ignored the comparisons. A man my age learns that not every insult deserves a response. Sometimes dignity is knowing which battles are too small to fight. When Logan and Kelsey married, I paid for more of the wedding than I had planned. Kelsey's father made a large speech about family, responsibility, and providing for the next generation. Everyone applauded him. I stood near the back of the reception hall and watched my son dance with his new wife. That was enough for me. At least I told myself it was. A year later, they wanted to buy their first house. They had decent jobs but not enough savings for the down payment. Logan came to me ashamed, speaking in circles before finally admitting what they needed. I wrote the check. I told him not to worry about paying me back quickly. He never did. When their first child was born, daycare costs overwhelmed them. Kelsey said returning to work was necessary for her career, and Logan said they were already stretched too thin. I covered the daycare. When their second child arrived, I covered that too. After a storm tore shingles from their roof, their insurance payment left a large gap. I paid the contractor before Logan even knew the final amount. There were medical bills, car repairs, school supplies, tuition costs, and emergencies that seemed to appear every few months. Each problem arrived wrapped in urgency. Each conversation ended with me opening my checkbook. Then came the monthly transfers. $3,800. It was supposed to last 6 months. Just until we catch up, Logan said. 6 months became a year. A year became several. The transfer left my account automatically on the first business day of every month. First, Logan thanked me. Then the thanks became shorter. Eventually, they stopped altogether. The money had changed its meaning. To me, it was help. To them, it had become income. I saw signs of it but refused to name them. Kelsey bought expensive handbags, changed vehicles before the old one was paid off, and planned vacations while complaining about rising grocery prices. Logan rarely questioned her. He had learned that silence was easier than confrontation. Perhaps he learned that from me. Sunday dinners began after I retired. I invited them twice a month, sometimes more. I roasted chicken, mashed potatoes by hand, and baked apple pie using my wife's old recipe. The grandchildren filled the house with noise, and for a few hours I could pretend the years had given something back. That particular Sunday felt ordinary. The children argued over dessert. Logan talked about work. Kelsey checked her phone beneath the table, believing I did not notice. The conversation turned toward parenting after one of the grandchildren received a warning at school for refusing to follow instructions. Logan smiled and said stubbornness probably ran in the family. I laughed. Kelsey did not. She placed her fork beside her plate with slow precision and looked directly at me. "You know," she said, "I've been thinking about something." Her voice was calm. That made what followed worse. "You raised a weak man." The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Nothing else moved. Kelsey leaned back slightly, as though she had finally said something long overdue. "My father would have done a better job." I did not look at her. I looked at Logan. My son stared at his plate. His face tightened, but he said nothing. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for one sentence, one protest, one acknowledgement of the years that had come before Kelsey knew his name. Instead, he nodded. Once, a small movement, barely visible, but I saw it. I had spent more than 20 years making sure that boy never doubted he was loved. I had buried my grief, sacrificed my body, and emptied my accounts so he could stand upright in a world that had taken his mother too soon. And he nodded. I looked at him for several seconds, long enough for the truth to settle. Respect could not be purchased. Not with money, not with labor, not even with love. "Okay," I said. That was all. I finished dinner without raising my voice. I cleared the plates. I wrapped leftover pie for the grandchildren. I hugged them at the door and watched Logan carry the container to his car without meeting my eyes. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table. Kelsey's insult did not keep me awake. Logan's silence did. By sunrise, I understood that I had spent years protecting him from consequences until he no longer recognized generosity as a choice. The following morning, I made one phone call. Not to my son. To my accountant. My accountant answered on the third ring. "Morning, Nathan." His name was Howard Bell. We had known each other for almost 30 years. Long enough for him to recognize trouble in the way I breathed before speaking. He had handled my taxes when I was still running crews across half of Idaho, had helped me organize my retirement accounts, and had warned me more than once that I was giving away too much money. I had always ignored him. That morning, I did not. "I need you to cancel the monthly transfer to Logan," I said. Howard was silent. "The $3,800? Yes. Temporarily? No." The word came out without anger. That surprised me. I had expected rage to rise when I finally said it aloud, but there was only exhaustion. The kind that settles into a man after he has carried something heavy for so long that he forgets how it feels to stand straight. Howard cleared his throat. "You're certain?" "I've never been more certain." He did not ask what had happened. Accountants learn that numbers often tell the story before people do. He had watched that transfer leave my account every month. He had watched the checks for the house, the daycare, the roof, the medical bills, and the emergencies that never seemed to end. "I'll stop it today," he said. "The next payment won't go through." "Good." "Nathan." "Yes." "You know they built their budget around that money." I looked through the kitchen window at the empty driveway where Logan's car had been the night before. That was their mistake. After the call ended, I remained at the table with my hand resting on the phone. Nothing in the room had changed. The clock still ticked above the stove. The coffee had gone cold. Morning light still fell across the floorboards in narrow golden strips. But something inside me had shifted. For years, I had mistaken rescue for love. Every time Logan struggled, I stepped between him and the consequence. When he overspent, I covered the difference. When he chose comfort over discipline, I made sure comfort survived. When he failed to prepare, I became the preparation. I told myself I was helping him. The truth was uglier. I had raised him to believe that there would always be another floor beneath him, no matter how far he fell. And I was that floor. Canceling the transfer did not feel like revenge. Revenge burns hot. This felt cold and deliberate, like closing a valve before a flood destroyed the foundation. I did not call Logan. I did not send a warning. Nobody had warned me before insulting the life I had spent building. Nobody had paused to consider whether the man paying their bills deserved a place at the table beyond the chair he occupied. So I waited. The first week passed without a word. On Tuesday, I saw photographs online from a restaurant in downtown Boise. Kelsey sat beneath hanging lights with a glass in her hand. Logan was beside her, smiling in the careful way he always smiled when she wanted a picture. The caption mentioned celebrating another successful month. I stared at the image longer than I should have. They had not noticed yet. That was what hurt most. $3,800 could disappear from my account every month without gratitude. But its absence had not yet reached them because they had stopped seeing where it came from. Money had become air. Invisible. Expected. I closed the page. The second week brought silence too, though I began to notice small signs. Logan called on Thursday afternoon. For one foolish moment I thought he might apologize. Instead, he asked whether I could pick up the grandchildren on Saturday because he and Kelsey had plans. I agreed. The children were not responsible for their parents' choices. We spent the afternoon at the park, then stopped for ice cream. My granddaughter told me her mother had been angry because one of their cards had been declined at a clothing store. My grandson said his parents had argued in the kitchen after they thought the children were asleep. I did not ask questions. Children should not be messengers in adult wars. When Logan collected them, he looked tired. His shirt was wrinkled, and there were dark circles beneath his eyes. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Fine." He avoided my gaze. I could have told him then. I could have offered him a chance to speak honestly. But honesty had been available at my dinner table, and he had chosen silence. So I let him leave. By the third week, the calls began coming from relatives. My sister, Elaine, was first. "Did you stop helping Logan?" Her tone was cautious, almost apologetic. "I stopped one recurring payment. Kelsey says you cut them off because of a disagreement." "It wasn't a disagreement. She said you're punishing the children. The children still have food, clothes, and 2 working parents." Elaine sighed. "You know how young families struggle." "I do." The difference was that when I struggled, nobody deposited $3,800 into my account. I worked. I adjusted. I went without. I did not say those things to Elaine. I was tired of explaining facts to people who had already accepted someone else's version of the truth. "Are you going to restart it?" she asked. "No." That answer spread quickly. An uncle called, then one of Logan's cousins. Each conversation carried the same accusation wrapped in different language. I had abandoned my son. I was being stubborn. I was destroying a family over one hurtful sentence. Nobody mentioned the nod. Nobody mentioned the years of support. Nobody asked why two employed adults were unable to survive without a retired man's monthly transfer. Kelsey had told them a simpler story. Simple stories are dangerous because they leave no room for receipts. Kept mine. Every transfer, every loan, every tuition payment, every emergency expense. I had records going back years, though I had never imagined I would need them as evidence of my own devotion. Then, on the 22nd day, their automatic rent payment failed. I learned about it later, but I can imagine the moment clearly. Logan standing in the kitchen with his phone in one hand. Kelsey demanding to know what he had done. Both of them searching their accounts, moving numbers around, blaming fees, delays, the bank, anyone except themselves. Their landlord had already given them extensions before. They had paid late more than once, confident that money would appear before patience ran out. This time it did not. The landlord refused another delay. That evening, the argument became loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Kelsey accused Logan of hiding money. Logan told her the transfer had not arrived. She called him careless. He reminded her that the transfer came from me. Then she said the words she always used when she wanted to hurt him. "You're not man enough to provide for this family." I did not hear that sentence myself. Logan repeated it to me later. At 2:02 in the morning, my phone rang. The sound tore through the darkness. For a moment, I did not know where I was. Then I saw my son's name glowing on the screen. I answered. "Logan?" There was breathing on the other end. Uneven. Broken. Then a sound I had not heard since he was a boy. He was crying. Not quietly. Not with dignity. He was crying so hard that his words collapsed into one another. "Dad, I messed up." I sat upright in bed. "What happened?" "We're going to lose the apartment." His voice cracked on the final word. I said nothing. Sometimes silence forces truth into the open. "The rent didn't go through," he continued. "The landlord won't give us more time. Kelsey's been screaming all night. She says I ruined everything. She says I'm weak." The word remained between us. Weak. The same word she had used at my table. The same judgment he had accepted with a nod. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. I looked toward the dark window. My reflection stared back at me, gray-haired and tired. A man who had spent decades believing love meant preventing pain. "Did you make a budget?" I asked. "What?" "After the transfer stopped. Did you make a budget?" "No. We thought there was a bank delay." "Did you call me?" "Kelsey said you'd calm down." So that was what they believed. They thought my dignity was a tantrum. They thought time would return me to my proper place beneath their expenses. "Dad," Logan said, "can you restart the payments? Just until things settle down." I closed my eyes. There it was. Not an apology. Not yet. Only another request. I pictured him at 8 years old, standing in our kitchen after his mother died. I remembered kneeling in front of him and promising that I would never leave him alone. For 20 years I had kept that promise. But protecting a child and enabling a man were not the same thing. "Logan," I said calmly, "adults sometimes have to face the consequences of their own decisions." He began crying harder. "Please. The transfers are not coming back." The line went silent except for his breathing. Then he asked the question I knew would come. "How can you do this to your own son?" I held the phone tightly, because even then, after everything, some part of me wanted to save him. But I had finally learned that a lifeline can become a chain for the person holding the other end. "I'm not doing this to you," I said. "I'm refusing to keep doing it for you." Then I ended the call and sat alone in the darkness, listening to the silence return. By sunrise, 3 relatives had left messages on my phone. I listened to none of them immediately. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and stood at the kitchen window while pale morning light spread across the yard. The neighborhood looked unchanged. Sprinklers clicked over trimmed lawns. A delivery truck rolled past. Somewhere nearby, A dog barked at nothing. Inside my house, everything was quiet, but the silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt like the pause before men arrived to tear down a condemned building. Elaine called again at 8. I answered because she was my sister, and because avoiding the conversation would only allow Kelsey's version of events to harden into fact. Nathan, what happened last night? Her voice carried the careful judgment of someone pretending she had not already chosen a side. Logan called me. I know. He called several people after you hung up. I closed my eyes. Of course he had. A man who had never learned to solve a crisis would naturally search for someone else to apply pressure. Kelsey says they may lose their apartment, Elaine continued. She says you refused to help. I refused to restart the monthly transfer. They have children. They also have jobs. That isn't the point. It is exactly the point. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said what everyone eventually said. This started over one comment at dinner. I looked toward the dining table. 3 nights earlier, I had cleared the plates from that table with my own hands while my son refused to defend me. The room had been cleaned. The dishes had been washed. Nothing remained of that evening except memory. But memory was enough. No, I said. It ended over one comment. It started years ago. Elaine asked what that meant. For the first time, I told her. I told her about the down payment on their first house. I told her about daycare for 2 children, the roof after the storm, the medical bills, the car repair, the tuition payments, and the money I sent every month. How much every month? She asked. $3,800. Silence. Not the accusing silence from before. A calculating silence. How long? Years. Nathan, I didn't know. Nobody asked. She tried to soften her voice. Kelsey made it sound like you helped occasionally. Kelsey makes many things sound smaller when someone else paid for them. Elaine apologized before ending the call. It was not a complete apology. People rarely admit they judge too quickly. They wrap regret in softer phrases and hope you understand what they cannot bring themselves to say. Still, it was a beginning. The next call came from my cousin Richard. He was less careful. You can't let your grandchildren become homeless. They're not homeless. They could be. Then their parents need to act. He accused me of using money to control my son. That one almost made me laugh. Control would have meant demanding obedience before every payment. Control would have meant choosing their home, their cars, their vacations, and their purchases. I had demanded nothing. That was the problem. I had given without conditions until they confused generosity with surrender. I don't expect you to understand, I told him. I understand family. Then help them. He stopped speaking. It is easy to volunteer another man's money. It is harder when the request reaches your own account. By the end of the week, 6 relatives had contacted me. Some were angry. Others were curious. All had heard the same story. An old man had become offended by his daughter-in-law and punished an innocent family. I argued with none of them. Instead, I invited them to my house on Saturday. Not together. I had no interest in staging a trial. I told each person who called that my records were available if they wanted the truth. Elaine came first. I had spread the documents across my dining table. Bank statements, copies of checks, loan records, receipts, tuition invoices, insurance gaps, daycare payments, transfers marked with dates and amounts. Years of my life reduced to paper. Elaine stood beside the table without touching anything. My God, she whispered. The numbers were not dramatic individually. $800 here, $2,000 there, a roof payment, a medical expense, a repair, $3,800 every month. Together, they became something larger than assistance. They became a second household carried on the back of one retired man. Richard arrived later. He entered with the expression of someone prepared to lecture me. Then he saw the documents. His anger disappeared before he reached the end of the table. You paid their rent too? More than once. And the daycare? For both children. He lifted a statement, studied it, then placed it down carefully. Why didn't Logan tell anyone? Because people do not brag about support they believe they deserve. One by one, the calls stopped. The accusations faded. Kelsey's story had survived only because nobody had examined the cost of believing it. Receipts have no emotions. They do not become defensive. They simply wait. 2 weeks later, Logan took a second job. He began working evenings at a building supply warehouse after finishing his regular shift. The work was physical, repetitive, and humbling. He loaded trucks beneath fluorescent lights with men younger than him, then returned home after midnight smelling of dust and sweat. I knew that smell. It had followed me through most of my life. Kelsey did not take a second job. Not immediately. She sold things. The first was a designer handbag she had once displayed on the chair beside her at restaurants. Then came a watch, several pairs of shoes, and a set of expensive luggage bought for vacations they could no longer afford. She listed everything online. The photographs were polished. The descriptions used words like pristine, exclusive, and rare. But desperation has a way of showing through even the cleanest picture. Their landlord gave them one final extension after Logan paid part of the balance from his warehouse wages. Kept them inside the apartment, but only temporarily. The rent was too high. The car payments were too high. The life they had constructed depended on money they did not earn. For the first time, they had to examine every expense. They canceled subscriptions. They stopped eating at restaurants. They returned one of the leased vehicles. Kelsey complained to anyone who would listen that their lives had been destroyed. I listened to none of it. A life is not destroyed because luxury becomes unaffordable. It is revealed. A month later, they moved into a smaller apartment on the other side of Boise. 2 bedrooms, older appliances, no swimming pool, no covered parking. The grandchildren had to share a room, something Kelsey described as humiliating. I had shared a room with 2 brothers until I was 17. None of us considered it a tragedy. On moving day, Logan called and asked whether I could help. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. He had not apologized. Neither had I demanded one. "I'll bring my truck," I said. I arrived at 7 in the morning with straps, blankets, and a handcart. Logan looked thinner. His shoulders sagged beneath a faded shirt. The softness that comfort had placed around him was disappearing. We worked without discussing the transfer. I carried boxes. He loaded furniture. Kelsey stayed inside with the children and spoke to me only when necessary. At noon, Logan and I sat on the tailgate of my truck eating sandwiches from a gas station. "I didn't know how expensive everything was," he said. I looked at him. He kept his eyes on the pavement. "What did you think happened every month?" "I don't know." That answer was honest. More honest than anything he had said in years. "I thought the money was just there." "Money is never just there." He nodded slowly. His hands were red from carrying boxes. A blister had opened near his thumb. For the first time in his adult life, he was beginning to understand that every comfort rests on someone's labor. Sometimes your own. Sometimes another man's. We finished after dark. Before I left, Logan asked whether the monthly payments might return once things improved. I looked at my son standing beneath the weak yellow light outside his smaller apartment. "No." His face tightened. I continued before he could argue. "I will help with the grandchildren. I'll give advice. If your car breaks down on the highway, call me. If you need another pair of hands, I'll show up." He looked toward the apartment window where Kelsey stood watching us. "But the monthly money is over," I said. "Permanently." He swallowed. Then he nodded. That nod was different from the one at dinner. The first had dismissed me. This one accepted a boundary. I drove home alone, tired from the move, my back aching in the familiar places. Part of me felt cruel. A father does not stop wanting to protect his child simply because that child becomes a man. But protection without an ending becomes dependence. Generosity without respect becomes obligation. And obligation, when mistaken for love, eventually poisons everyone it touches. Months passed. Logan kept both jobs. Kelsey found part-time work at a medical office. They created a budget, though I heard they argued over every line. They paid rent before buying anything else. They learned to wait. They learned to say no to themselves. The grandchildren still visited me on weekends. I cooked for them, helped with schoolwork, and never spoke badly about their parents. Children should inherit wisdom, not resentment. Then, one cold afternoon several months after the dinner that changed everything, a car turned into my driveway. Logan stepped out alone. He stood beside the car for a long moment before walking toward my door. When I opened it, he looked directly at me. "Dad," he said, "I owe you the truth." I opened the front door, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Logan looked older than he had just a few months earlier. Not older in years, older in experience. The second job had carved away the softness that comfort had wrapped around him. His hands were rough again. There were new lines around his eyes, and the confidence that had once depended on easy solutions had been replaced by something quieter. Humility. "Dad," he said again. The word sounded different this time, carried weight. "Come in." He stepped inside, removing his boots without being asked. That small gesture caught my attention because he had stopped doing it years ago. People rarely notice the little signs that reveal a person's character. They search for dramatic speeches while ignoring ordinary respect. We sat at the same kitchen table where I had spent countless mornings drinking coffee alone. The same table where I had sorted bills. The same table where I had called Howard to cancel the transfer. Life has a strange habit of bringing people back to the places where everything changed. "I've rehearsed this conversation for weeks," Logan admitted. "I figured. I kept starting over." I nodded. The important conversations usually require several attempts. He looked down at his hands. "I should have defended you." There it was. Not an excuse. Not a qualification. A confession. I knew what Kelsey said was wrong. He paused. I knew it the second the words left her mouth. "Then why didn't you say anything?" His shoulders dropped. "Because I was tired. Tired of arguing with her." He rubbed his palms together slowly. "Every time she compared you to her father, I stayed quiet because pushing back always turned into another fight. At first, I thought I was keeping the peace." He gave a bitter smile. "But all I was really doing was choosing the easier path." Silence settled between us. Not the hostile silence from that Sunday dinner. This one made room for honesty. "I watched you nod," he continued quietly. "When you said, 'Okay,' I thought you'd cool off after a few days. I know. I didn't understand what that one word meant. No. I do now." I leaned back in my chair. "What changed?" He laughed once. It wasn't a happy sound. "The warehouse." I waited. The first week. I came home so exhausted I fell asleep on the couch with my work boots still on. He looked around my kitchen. Then I remembered how many nights I'd seen you do exactly that. His eyes drifted toward the window. I started noticing things. "What things?" "How expensive groceries are." He smiled weakly. "How much daycare costs." He shook his head. "How fast money disappears." Every sentence sounded less like an explanation and more like a lesson he had paid to learn himself. I kept asking where my paycheck went. He laughed again. Then I remembered that's exactly what I'd been asking for years. He looked at me directly. "The difference is that I finally knew the answer." I said nothing. Sometimes people need to hear their own thoughts without interruption. "I always believed we were surviving because I worked." He swallowed. "The truth is..." He stopped. "The truth is we were surviving because you worked." Those words carried more weight than any apology could. Because they were true. "I confused your generosity with my income." His voice had become barely louder than a whisper. "I stopped seeing it as your sacrifice." He looked away. "I started treating it like my paycheck." I remembered Howard warning me years earlier. "They've built their budget around your money." He had been right. More importantly, Logan finally understood why. "I've been angry at myself." "For what?" "For letting Kelsey compare you to her father." He drew a slow breath. "You know something strange?" "What?" "I don't actually know if her father ever helped us." That caught my attention. What do you mean? He talks about money. Logan shrugged. He gives advice. He likes reminding everyone how successful he is. Another pause. But when I sat down and looked through our finances, he smiled sadly. I couldn't find much that actually came from him. I thought back to all the family gatherings, the speeches, the opinions, the comparisons. Appearance has a way of sounding expensive. Reality usually keeps receipts. It was always you. He looked around the room again. The house, the roof, the daycare, the emergencies, the monthly transfer. His voice cracked slightly. I spent years thanking the wrong person. I stood and walked to the coffee maker. Coffee? He nodded. Please. I poured 2 cups. The smell filled the kitchen the way it always had. Simple things survive even after complicated relationships fall apart. When I returned, Logan accepted the mug with both hands. I wanted to pay you back. I smiled faintly. You can't. I know. I don't mean because of the amount. He looked confused. You can't repay years. His eyes stayed fixed on me. Time doesn't issue refunds. Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Then Logan reached into his jacket pocket and placed an envelope on the table. I brought something. What is it? He pushed it toward me. Open it. Inside was a cashier's check. $500. I looked up. It's not much, he said quickly. I know. It's the first extra money we've had. He smiled nervously. I wanted the first payment to come to you. I slid the check back across the table. No. His face fell. Dad. No. I owe you. You owe your children stability. I can do both. I shook my head. You've finally learned how to stand on your own feet. I rested my hand on the envelope. I'm not taking away your first solid step. His eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve that. Probably not. A surprised laugh escaped him. Neither of us had laughed together in a long time. But becoming the man I hoped you'd become was never supposed to be something you earned. I smiled. It was always the goal. He wiped at his eyes. I spent months thinking you stopped loving me. I never stopped. I wasn't sure. I stopped financing your dependence. I looked him straight in the eye. That isn't the same thing. The distinction settled over the room. I would have come if your car broke down. He nodded. I know. I would have watched the grandchildren. Another nod. I would have shown up if you needed another pair of hands. I know. But I was never going to become your paycheck again. He lowered his head. I understand now. Outside, the afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the yard. For the first time in years, I felt like I was sitting across from another man instead of the boy I had spent my life trying to protect. Growth often arrives wearing the clothes of hardship. Comfort rarely teaches anything. As Logan prepared to leave, he stopped beside the front door. I talked to Kelsey. I waited. She still thinks you overreacted. That did not surprise me. People rarely apologize for losing something they believed belonged to them. He nodded slowly. But she admits we never would have learned to live within our means if you hadn't stopped. Does she believe that? I think she believes the results. He smiled faintly. The reason is harder for her. Fair enough. Some lessons take longer than others. He stepped onto the porch, then turned back. Can I ask you something? Of course. If that dinner happened again. He hesitated. Would you still cancel the transfer? I looked past him toward the quiet street where I had watched him grow from a boy riding a bicycle into a man carrying responsibilities of his own. The answer came easily. Yes. He lowered his eyes. I would have hoped for a different ending. So would I. But not a different decision. He nodded once. This time there was no shame in it. Only understanding. After he drove away, I returned to my porch with a fresh cup of coffee. The neighborhood was as quiet as it had always been. Nothing about the street had changed. Only the man sitting on the porch had. Looking back, I realized I spent years believing that love meant removing every obstacle from my son's path. I was wrong. Real love prepares someone to face obstacles without you. Money can solve bills, can repair roofs, can buy groceries, pay tuition, and keep the lights on. But it cannot purchase gratitude, cannot create respect, and it certainly cannot raise a man. Only consequences can do that. My relationship with Logan slowly became stronger than it had been in years, not because I started sending money again, but because we finally stopped treating each other as provider and dependent. We became what we should have been all along, a father and his son. Sometimes the greatest gift a parent gives isn't another check. Sometimes it's the courage to stop writing them. So let me ask you this. If the people you sacrificed everything for began treating your generosity as something they were owed instead of something they appreciated, would you keep giving? Or would you finally allow them to discover the cost of standing on their own?